Hey everyone, today we're stepping into a world where men carried death on their backs in steel canisters, knowing they might only live for 4 minutes once the battle began. A world where the air itself caught fire, where caves became ovens, and where screams vanished into smoke that no one dared to breathe. You won't hear bugles or gallant charges here. Instead, you'll hear the hiss of ignited fuel rushing through nozzles, the roar of bunkers bursting into flame, and the silence that followed when nothing inside was left alive. This isn't about strategy on a map. This is about the men who shouldered the most terrifying weapon of the 20th century and often paid for it with their own lives. If you want unflinching stories of war's darkest inventions, hit like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from? And what moment in history still burns in your memory now? Steady yourself, because you're about to strap on the tank and walk into battle as a flamethrower operator. You stand there, a chill wind perhaps whispering across the desolate landscape. Or perhaps the heavy, humid air of a distant jungle presses down upon you. Before you, a contraption of steel and canvas, a cylindrical tank, awaits. You reach for it, feeling the cold, unyielding metal beneath your gloved fingers, the coarse texture of the straps. This isn't just equipment. It is a destiny. With a deep, measured breath, you begin the process of hoisting this burden onto your back. The weight settles, a formidable 70 pounds, pressing down on your shoulders, making your knees instinctively flex to accommodate the shift in your center of gravity. It is the weight of highly volatile fuel, a potent mixture of gasoline and thickeners, a walking bomb. Every fiber of your being vibrates with the stark reality of what you carry. Each deliberate step you take, whether through ankle-deep mud that clings to your heavy boots or over tangled strands of barbed wire that snag at your uniform, is a conscious act of defiance against the inevitable. You move with a strange, almost dreamlike slowness, keenly aware that every single movement draws attention. You know, with a chilling certainty that settles deep in your bones, that you are the sniper's prime target. Your silhouette, burdened by that unmistakable tank, stands out against the ravaged landscape. There is no pretense of camouflage for you, no artful blending into the shadows. You are a beacon, a dangerous, burning target. Ahead, just a few yards of torn, open ground separate you from the enemy's fortified position. A bunker, perhaps, or a cave entrance. There is no true cover to offer solace, no sturdy tree trunk or shattered wall to hide behind. It is just you, the open expanse, and the chilling promise of what lies beyond. A quiet understanding settles over you, heavy and profound. Your life expectancy, in the heart of this kind of engagement, is measured not in hours or even in minutes, but in a cruel handful of breaths, 4 minutes, on average. Just enough time for your lungs to draw in air a few times, for your heart to beat a few more frantic rhythms, before the inevitable claims you. This isn't fear in the traditional sense. It's a calm, unsettling acceptance, a silent pact with the very fire you carry. You are here to bring the inferno, and in doing so, you have become a part of it, a living torch waiting for the spark. And as you take that next slow, deliberate step, the air around you seems to grow heavier, charged with the unseen energy of what is to come. Before the era of steel tanks and petroleum-based fuels, the concept of a weaponized flame was already whispering through the annals of time. A potent and terrifying secret. Imagine, if you will, the serene blue of the Aegean Sea, stretching out under a Mediterranean sun, only to be suddenly shattered by an unprecedented horror. This was the stage for Greek fire, a mysterious and formidable weapon that emerged in the 7th century, forever changing the nature of naval warfare. You picture ancient galleys, their oars rhythmically churning the water, sails billowing, all transformed into towering infernos on the waves. The exact composition of Greek fire remains an enigma, a secret guarded so fiercely that its formula has been lost to history. Yet, its legend burns bright, a testament to its devastating power. You can almost smell the acrid smoke, hear the terrified cries as entire fleets, once proud symbols of naval might, were swallowed by unquenchable flames. It was said to burn on water, to cling to the hulls of ships, defying all attempts to douse its infernal embrace. This wasn't merely a weapon. It was a psychological terror, a harbinger of doom that turned the very element of life into an instrument of destruction. The stories tell of its introduction during the Byzantine Arab Wars, particularly in repelling Arab sieges of Constantinople. You might imagine the sheer disbelief, the panic that must have gripped the enemy sailors as streams of liquid fire erupted from nozzles mounted on Byzantine ships, arching across the water to engulf their vessels. The sight alone, a fiery serpent striking across the waves, must have been enough to break the morale of even the most hardened warriors. The air would have been thick with the smell of burning pitch and wood, mingled with the metallic tang of fear. The heat radiating from the burning ships would have been immense, turning the once cool sea breeze into a searing wind. This ancient, almost mythical flame laid the groundwork for a deeply unsettling truth that fire, in its most unleashed form, possessed a primal terror no other weapon could quite replicate. It consumed, it purified, it obliterated, leaving nothing but ash and memory in its wake. The echoes of those burning ships, the whispers of the unholy fire that danced on the water, lingered for centuries, a silent promise of the horrors to come. The idea, dormant for so long, of wielding such destructive elemental power, waited patiently in the human consciousness, ready to be rediscovered and refined, eventually transforming into the very apparatus you now find strapped to your back. The past, in its own quiet, slow-flowing way, had set the stage for the terrifying present. Centuries later, the quiet, almost forgotten whispers of Greek fire resurfaced, not on the open seas, but in the muddy, scarred earth of the Western Front. It was the Germans, in the grim landscape of World War I, who revived this ancient and terrifying idea, giving birth to the Flammenwerfer, the flamethrower. You can imagine the bleak, desolate stretch of no man's land, pockmarked with shell craters, a labyrinth of trenches carving scars into the land. Then, for the first time, soldiers witnessed something utterly new, something that defied the conventional horrors of bullets and gas. You might be huddled in a trench, the cold, damp earth pressing against your back, the air thick with the smell of stale gunpowder and fear. Suddenly, from across the shell-cratered expanse, a terrifying sight unfolds. Steel tubes, held by figures in the distant enemy trenches, begin to spurt jets of incandescent fire. It's not a burst of light, but a liquid stream of pure, consuming flame, arcing across the churned earth. The fire seems to dance and writhe, blazing across the desolate landscape like something malevolent, as if ancient demons themselves had been unleashed from the depths of the earth, come to cleanse the world in a horrifying purification ritual. A deep, guttural sound follows the visible flame, a sound that promises absolute destruction. But the early flamethrowers were a double-edged sword, as dangerous to their users as they were to their victims. You can picture the sheer terror of an incident, reported with chilling detail, where a sudden, unexpected gust of wind, a mere whim of nature, twisted a jet of flame in midair. Instead of reaching its intended target, it turned back upon the very men who wielded it, engulfing 20 French soldiers in an instant, burning them alive in their own trench. The wind, usually a gentle whisper, became an accomplice to the horror, a silent betrayer. Within the confines of enemy bunkers, the flames delivered a slow, insidious death. You envision the narrow, claustrophobic spaces, the air already stale and heavy, when the inferno erupted inside. It wasn't just the searing heat that claimed lives. The flames voraciously consumed the oxygen, sucking it away with terrifying speed, leaving the men inside to suffocate in absolute, chilling silence. There were no dramatic explosions, no heroic last stands, just the quiet, agonizing struggle for breath as the life-giving air vanished. And even for those who survived the initial blast, the danger lingered. The dense, choking smoke that filled those confined spaces carried with it a silent killer carbon monoxide. Minutes, sometimes an hour or more. After the flames had subsided, survivors would quietly collapse, their bodies finally succumbing to the invisible poison. For the first time, war didn't just kill with bullets or shrapnel. It didn't just maim with gas. It consumed souls with fire, leaving a lingering, unseen horror that haunted the very air. This new form of warfare added a layer of primal terror, a deep-seated fear of being utterly consumed, body and spirit, by an unholy element. To be struck by the fiery breath of a flamethrower was to experience a horror beyond words, a transformation from living flesh into a searing, agonizing inferno. You can only begin to imagine the terrifying moment, the split second when the liquid fire touches you, and your world erupts in an unbearable blaze. The initial shock, the intense, searing pain that instantly consumes every nerve ending in your body. There is no escape, no quick extinguishing. You are, in that horrific instant, transformed into a human torch. The screams that would tear from your throat, raw and desperate, echoing across the battlefield, would be a sound that no living soul could ever truly forget. They would continue, perhaps for an eternity in your mind, until the unbearable agony reached its absolute limit, and your body, utterly consumed, finally collapsed into silence. For the rare few who survived such an ordeal, the battle was far from over. Their bodies, scarred beyond recognition, would carry the indelible marks of the fire, a testament to an experience that defied comprehension. But the scars ran far deeper than the skin. The true, lasting wounds were etched into their very souls, manifesting in endless, waking nightmares. The smell of burning, the sight of the dancing flames, the echo of their own screams or the screams of others. These would become constant companions, haunting their quiet moments, stealing their peace. You can picture them, years later, staring blankly into the distance, perhaps by a crackling fireplace, the innocent warmth of the logs suddenly conjuring images of that other terrible fire. Soldiers from all sides, veterans of countless battles and witnesses to unimaginable cruelties, universally admitted to fearing no weapon more profoundly than the flamethrower. It wasn't just the physical threat. It was the psychological terror it inflicted. The mere sight of a flame jet, arcing through the air, even at a distance, was enough to shatter the resolve of hardened men. You can hear the whispers spreading through the trenches. The flamethrowers are coming. This rumor alone could cause entire sections of a line to falter, positions to be abandoned, the instinct for self-preservation overwhelming all tactical considerations, the raw, visceral fear of being burned alive, of that agonizing, consuming death. Transcended all training, all discipline. It reduced men to their most primal state, inspiring a panic that few other weapons could ever hope to achieve. The flamethrower was not just a tool for killing. It was a weapon designed to break the human spirit, to instill a terror so absolute that the will to fight simply melted away in its horrifying presence. And in its wake, it left not just destruction, but a lasting, indelible psychological scar on the very fabric of warfare. Within the confines of a bunker, the flamethrower delivered a particularly insidious form of death, a chilling silence that spoke volumes of unspeakable suffering. You can imagine the cramped, subterranean space, perhaps smelling of damp earth and stale air, where men huddled, seeking refuge from the chaos above. Then, the terrifying roar from outside, a blast of searing liquid fire breaching the entrance. In an instant, the temperature within the bunker would soar to an unimaginable 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, a furnace of pure agony, but even more horrifying, perhaps, was the immediate, voracious consumption of oxygen. Within a mere few seconds, the very air needed for life would simply vanish, sucked away by the ravenous flames. The men inside, gasping, struggling, would experience a death utterly devoid of sound. No screams could escape, no final cries for help, only the quiet, desperate internal struggle for a breath that would never come. It was an absolute silence, a complete nullification of life, leaving behind only the scorched remnants and the lingering, acrid smell of burning. This silent obliteration, in its profound horror, was almost more terrifying than the cacophony of an explosion. It suggested a total erasure, a death so complete it left no audible trace. For the men who carried the flamethrowers, a different, equally terrifying fate awaited them, if captured. There was no pretense of mercy, no chance of being taken as a prisoner of war. The enemy viewed these operators not as soldiers, but as monsters, as bringers of an unspeakable terror. Capture meant instant execution, a swift and brutal end, often carried out with a ferocity born of hatred and fear. You understand this implicit contract you made the moment you strapped on that tank you wielded hell, and in return, you forfeited any claim to the conventions of warfare. The island of Iwo Jima, a desolate stretch of volcanic rock, became a crucible for this grim reality. You might hear the harrowing tale, passed in hushed tones among the weary troops, of one American flamethrower operator whose weapon jammed at a critical moment, exposed, vulnerable. He was dragged by unseen hands into the dark maw of a Japanese cave. For 2 agonizing days, his screams echoed from deep within that subterranean labyrinth, a horrifying testament to the fate that awaited him. The sounds, muffled by the earth, carried across the battlefield, a chilling serenade of torment. before finally falling silent. That prolonged agony, the knowledge that such a fate awaited you, was more feared by many than death itself. Flamethrowers, you realize with a cold certainty, were never just weapons. They were a curse, not only for the victims consumed by their fire, but also for the wielders, condemned by the very instrument they carried, both in life and in their final moments. The vast, humid battlefields of the Pacific during World War II presented a new, insidious challenge. Imagine yourself in the dense, suffocating jungle, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying foliage, every shadow a potential enemy. Here, the Japanese soldiers had dug themselves into deep, elaborate underground fortifications, pillboxes, caves, and tunnels, a network of hidden strongholds that seemed impervious to conventional attack. Rifles, the standard tools of infantry, were utterly useless against these entrenched positions. Their bullets merely splattered against the reinforced concrete or disappeared harmlessly into the earth. For days, the roar of artillery and the thunder of aerial bombs would pound these positions, shaking the very ground beneath your feet. You would feel the concussions, hear the endless explosions, watch as the jungle canopy was shredded into splinters. Yet, when the bombardment ceased, an eerie silence often followed, only to be broken by renewed enemy fire. The enemy remained unseen, unheard, waiting patiently below, emerging from their subterranean lairs to continue the fight. It was a maddening, frustrating reality. Then, you would see him, a lone figure, or perhaps a small team, moving with grim determination. A comrade, stooped under the familiar silhouette of that steel tank strapped to his back, the heavy nozzle slung across his shoulder. He was the only one. You knew, who could truly burn them out. He moved towards the unseen enemy, carrying the only answer to their defiance. A quiet understanding would pass between you, a silent acknowledgement of his impossible, terrifying task. When the flames finally erupted, it was a sight of apocalyptic beauty and horror. The dense, verdant jungle, previously a tapestry of deep greens and shadows, would instantly light up, transforming into an inferno. The towering trees, the thick undergrowth, all became fuel for an unholy conflagration, as if the very end of the world had arrived in a sudden, blinding flash of orange and red. From deep underground, muffled but unmistakable, you would hear the screams rising from the earth, echoing the agonizing truth of what was transpiring below. There were no duels here, no honorable exchanges of fire, only men, incinerated within seconds, their existence erased by the searing heat. But the horror was not confined to the enemy. After a mere 10 seconds of that roaring, consuming fire, the weapon would run dry. You, the operator, would be left gasping for breath, your lungs burning from the exertion and the acrid smoke. Sweat would stream down your face, mingling with the bitter taste of fuel, soaking your uniform. The adrenaline would drain, leaving you weak, exposed, and utterly vulnerable. Veterans of this particular hell later spoke with a quiet, chilling candor. Each burst killed the enemy, but also dug my own grave. For every life extinguished by the fire you wielded, a piece of your own life, your own soul, was consumed as well. The jungle fire, you understood, burned both ways, leaving a scorched earth and a scarred spirit in its wake. February 19th, 1945. You step onto the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, a landscape alien and hostile, an island formed from the Earth's raw fury. With every heavy, deliberate stride, your boots sink into the soft, shifting granules, the fine black dust clinging to your uniform, seeping into your pores. The weight of the 70 pounds of fuel on your back feels amplified here, a crushing burden in this unforgiving terrain. Almost immediately, before your eyes can even fully adjust to the desolate panorama, the air around you is torn apart by the brutal, staccato chatter of machine guns. Your comrades, moving ahead or to your flanks, are cut down, their bodies falling onto the dark sand, their screams swallowed by the roar of battle. The objective is clear, yet impossibly grim: to destroy the deeply entrenched Japanese pillboxes, those formidable concrete fortifications spitting death across the beach. To accomplish this, you must crawl, inch by agonizing inch, right up to their very mouths. You envision the narrow slits, the dark openings from which enemy fire spews forth, and know you must bring your fire directly to them. Every yard you painstakingly advance is a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice in the face of overwhelming odds. Each ragged breath you manage to draw might, with chilling certainty, be your very last. The sounds of combat are a dizzying, terrifying symphony. The crack of rifles, the thud of mortars, the constant, tearing spray of machine gun fire. Finally, you are there, close enough. You brace yourself, summon a final surge of adrenaline, and squeeze the trigger. With a deafening roar, a torrent of fire erupts from your nozzle, surging into the dark maw of the bunker. The flames, orange and violent, fill the confined space, a brief, horrifying spectacle of pure destruction. The screams that rise from within are abruptly cut short, vanishing into the thick, choking smoke that billows out, a dark promise of the devastation you have wrought. The air around you becomes heavy, acrid with the smell of burning, a metallic tang of battle. But the moment of triumph, if it can even be called that, is fleeting. Just moments after your fire subsides, the bunker, seemingly lifeless, springs back with a terrifying ferocity. Bayonet-wielding soldiers, often burned but still alive, or emerging from other, unseen passages, charge out from the depths of the earth, their faces contorted in a silent, desperate fury. In this savage landscape, you quickly realize you are both the hunter and the hunted, the bringer of fire and the vulnerable target of an enraged, fanatical foe. The lines blur, the roles reverse, and every shadow becomes a threat. The numbers speak to the unimaginable hell of Iwo Jima for the flamethrower operators. Of the 335 brave souls who deployed with these terrifying weapons on that black sand, a mere 18 came out alive. This statistic, stark and chilling, underscores the suicidal nature of the task. You are walking into a firestorm, carrying the very instrument of your potential demise, knowing that survival is an almost impossible miracle. The black sands of Iwo Jima, you understand, swallowed lives whole. And for the flamethrower men, it was a place where their fate was written in fire and ash. The sheer, catastrophic casualty rates among infantry flamethrower operators on battlefields like Iwo Jima painted a stark, undeniable picture. Far too many men, burdened by their 70-pound tanks, died before they could even fire a single burst. cut down by concentrated enemy fire. The solution, born of desperation and the relentless ingenuity of war, was to mount these terrifying weapons onto the formidable chassis of a Sherman tank. Thus, the M4A3R3 Zippo, or flame tank, was born, transforming the individual walking bomb into a mobile, steel-clad dragon. Now, you are not crawling through mud and barbed wire under the sniper's gaze. Instead, you sit within the cramped, echoing interior of a steel beast. The thick armor a comforting, yet deceptive, shield. Around you, however, instead of just the usual tank ammunition, are immense fuel tanks, holding 300 gallons of the same volatile liquid you once carried on your back. You are now inside a moving coffin, an armored vessel brimming with the potential for its own fiery demise. The scent of fuel, faint but constant, permeates the air, a silent reminder of the immense power and danger you command. When you fire this behemoth, the scale of destruction is amplified 100-fold. A colossal jet of fire, reaching out over 300 feet, erupts from the tank's nozzle. Imagine a cliffside, riddled with enemy positions, suddenly erupting into an inferno, or a line of fortified bunkers, transforming into a molten, burning slag heap in a matter of seconds. The flames tower over everything, turning entire sections of the landscape into an apocalyptic tableau. The roar of this flame is not just a sound, it's a primal force, vibrating through the tank's hull, through your very bones, a symphony of obliteration. But with this immense power came an equally immense risk. Every enemy gun, every anti-tank weapon, every concealed mine on the battlefield was now singularly focused on your tank. You were the priority target, the moment your fearsome weapon revealed itself. One well-aimed shell, one unseen mine, one direct hit to those massive fuel tanks, and you and your entire crew would instantly become a fireball, incinerated within your own steel shell. The heat within would be unimaginable, the end swift and absolute. Knowing this, the infantry, those weary soldiers who once watched their comrades fall with the portable flamethrowers, now ran alongside your steel monster. They moved in close, a protective escort, gunning down any enemy soldier who dared to approach with grenades, desperate to prevent them from hitting your vulnerable fuel tanks. Their lives, too, were now inextricably linked to the survival of your flamethrower tank. Veterans who witnessed these mobile infernos rolling across the battlefield later recounted that nothing, absolutely nothing, was more terrifying than the sight of a mobile fireball relentlessly advancing, consuming everything in its path. A true harbinger of doom. The steel dragon had been unleashed, a new, more powerful, and equally terrifying chapter in the story of fire and war. To carry a flamethrower was to carry, perhaps unconsciously, an implicit death sentence. From the moment the straps were secured across your shoulders, you were marked. Your comrades, those fighting alongside you, understood this grim reality with a quiet certainty. They would fire desperately, unleashing volleys of bullets, laying down suppressive fire, not just to cover your advance, but knowing, deep down, that despite their efforts, you might never return. There was a unique and profound bond shared among these men, forged in the silent understanding of the impossible task laid upon you. If, by some twist of fate, you were captured, the rules of war ceased to apply. You were not a prisoner of war in the conventional sense. entitled to certain protections. Instead, you were regarded as an abomination, a demon in human form who wielded the most inhumane of weapons. Capture meant instant execution, a swift and brutal end, often carried out without a moment's hesitation, fueled by the sheer terror and hatred you represented. The image of the Iwo Jima operator, dragged into a cave and heard screaming for 2 days before falling silent, was a chilling legend, a fate more feared than even death itself. It spoke of an agony so profound, so prolonged, that it transcended the physical, haunting the very imagination of all who heard it. Amidst this landscape of certain death, there were rare exceptions, men who defied the odds and etched their names into history. Herschel Woody Williams, a Marine Corps veteran, stands as a testament to extraordinary courage. For 5 harrowing hours on Iwo Jima, he single-handedly, and with incredible bravery, burned out multiple Japanese pillboxes, his actions earning him the Medal of Honor. He survived the war, a living miracle. But his survival was an anomaly. Almost no one else in his role, those who wielded the flamethrower, made it home. Their names, for the most part, are lost to history, their sacrifice absorbed into the inferno. To wield a flamethrower, you realize, was to carry both the torch of destructive power and the inescapable curse of imminent death. From the enemy's perspective, the flamethrower was not merely a weapon. It was an embodiment of pure, unadulterated horror. Imagine being a defender in a dark, cramped tunnel and seeing a flicker of orange in the distance, growing rapidly, the harbinger of unimaginable torment. The sight of flame, especially in the pre-dawn gloom or the perpetual darkness of a subterranean bunker, was enough to shatter the strongest resolve. Entire enemy positions were known to collapse, not under artillery bombardment, but at the mere rumor that flamethrowers are coming. The hiss and roar of the ignited fuel, a sound unlike any other on the battlefield, caused more profound panic than even the most sustained artillery barrage. It spoke not of distant death, but of intimate, agonizing annihilation. Inside the bunkers, men listened, paralyzed, as the screams of their comrades were suddenly cut short, knowing with chilling certainty that their turn was next, the fire steadily drawing closer. Many Japanese soldiers, faced with this terrifying prospect, chose to charge blindly into concentrated fire, preferring a quick, conventional death to the slow, agonizing torment of burning alive. Flamethrower troops were hated more profoundly than even snipers. Despised as monsters, their very presence dissolving the will to fight. The fire didn't just burn bodies, it burned away the very spirit of resistance, leaving behind only fear and despair. In the grand, terrifying tapestry of 20th century warfare, flamethrowers once held a uniquely decisive, if horrifying, role. They were the ultimate answer to seemingly impregnable fortifications. The only weapon capable of clearing out bunkers, caves, and pillboxes that no other artillery or infantry assault could touch. They broke stalemates, opened paths, and were, in their own brutal way, instruments of victory. Yet, the cost was always immense, not just to the enemy, but to the very men who carried them. With casualty rates so catastrophic, they remain a stark warning from history. For the survivors, those rare few who returned from the fiery crucible, the journey was far from over. They bore not only the physical scars, often grotesque and profound, but also an unseen, deeper trauma. The smell of burning flesh, The acrid scent of fuel and smoke never truly left them. It lingered in their memories, a phantom odor that could be triggered by the faintest whiff of a campfire or a distant barbecue, instantly transporting them back to the inferno. They lived with the echo of screams, the haunting images of people swallowed by fire in seconds, sights that imprinted themselves onto their souls to torment them forever. You can imagine the quiet, haunted look in their eyes, the unspoken stories held captive within. Today, the era of the flamethrower as a standard military weapon has largely passed. You will find these silent, chilling relics in museums, standing behind glass, their nozzles pointed harmlessly at empty space. They are artifacts, monuments to a bygone era of extreme violence. Yet they still possess an unsettling power to chill visitors, even in their inert state. The flames are gone, extinguished by time and the evolution of warfare. But the story they tell, a narrative of terror and sacrifice, still burns brightly across the pages of history, refusing to be forgotten. There were, briefly, attempts to rationalize their use. Some argued, perhaps in a detached, clinical manner, that fire killed instantly, perhaps even painlessly, a swift and efficient end. But for most, especially those who witnessed its effects, it was undeniably the most inhumane weapon of all, a tool designed to turn living, breathing men into screaming, agonizing human torches. The international community, slowly reckoning with the moral implications of such weaponry, eventually acted. In 1980, international law began to restrict weapons causing unnecessary suffering, a legal framework that effectively pushed flamethrowers out of the active arsenals of most modern armies. Today, the majority of militaries have abandoned them, preferring less indiscriminate and arguably less psychologically damaging methods of combat. Though it is whispered that some nations still keep them hidden in stockpiles, silent reminders of a darker age, their primary role has shifted. The weapon became less a tool of war and more a symbol of atrocity, a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Mention flamethrowers now, and people think not of tactical victories or strategic gains, but of unmitigated horror, of suffering beyond measure. If any weapon, you reflect, truly deserved to be called the breath of hell, the flamethrower was undoubtedly it. And as you quietly contemplate its legacy, a faint, acrid scent seems to linger in the air, a whisper from the past, a story that will always be told in fire. Imagine you stand on the very edge, your worn, heavy boots sinking just slightly into the slick, cool earth. Before you stretches a vast, desolate canvas known only as no man's land. It is not just a place, but a concept, a gaping wound torn into the very fabric of the world. Imagine it now, an endless, sprawling wasteland, a testament to ruin and human suffering. The moon, if it dares to pierce the perpetually overcast sky, casts long, ghostly shadows that dance amongst the twisted, skeletal fingers of barbed wire. These wires, once neat and orderly, are now gnarled and fused, forming impenetrable thickets, each barb a silent promise of pain and entanglement. The ground beneath you is a tapestry of unimaginable sorrow, a thick, clinging mud that seems to absorb all light and hope. It is a viscous, suffocating blanket, holding within its dark embrace the countless remains of those who dared to cross its treacherous expanse. You can almost feel the cold, damp earth reaching up, trying to pull you deeper into its silent depths. Every step is a struggle, a slow, deliberate act against the suction of the mire. A metallic tang, almost imperceptible at first, begins to drift into your nostrils, mingling with the heavy, earthy scent of damp soil. It is the inescapable, pervasive stench of rot. It clings to the very air you breathe, a constant, chilling reminder of the fragility of life. This isn't just the smell of decay, it's the smell of forgotten dreams, of youth extinguished, of promises broken. You take a slow, deep breath, and it fills your lungs, a bitter, haunting perfume that will forever be etched into your memory, settling on your uniform, in your hair, even in the taste at the back of your throat. Above this landscape of sorrow, a profound silence reigns, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind as it whispers through the torn remnants of trees and the rusted strands of wire. But within this silence, there is a distinct, unsettling tension. You know, with a certainty that chills you to the bone, that hidden within the shadowy crevices of the enemy's lines, machine guns wait. They are silent now, dormant, like sleeping beasts, but you can almost feel their cold, metallic presence, their potential for instant, overwhelming violence. They are poised, patiently biding their time, ready to unleash a torrent of lead at the first sign of movement, ready to carve swaths through any living thing that dares to venture into their deadly gaze. You shift your weight, the heavy leather of your pack settling against your shoulders, the rough wool of your uniform chafing slightly. You are keenly aware of the weight of your rifle, the cold steel a familiar comfort, yet also a heavy burden. The air hangs heavy, thick with unspoken dread. The expectation of the next command, the next push, a suffocating shroud over everything. You know the stories. You've seen the aftermath. The orders come from far behind the lines, from generals safe within their headquarters, men who still cling to outdated notions of warfare. They send men, shoulder to shoulder, into this very open, exposed expanse, knowing, deep down, that a horrifying percentage will be cut down, mown down like stalks of wheat before a scythe. It's a grim arithmetic, a calculus of human lives against impossible odds. You've witnessed it yourself. The devastating efficiency with which entire units can simply vanish, swallowed whole by the relentless barrage of artillery and the unforgiving sweep of machine gun fire. The screams, desperate and brief, are mere whispers against the roaring thunder of shells, swallowed by the insatiable maw of war. One moment, they are there, a mass of humanity, a living, breathing line of young men. The next, they are gone, leaving behind only broken earth, scattered debris, and an echoing silence that feels even heavier than the noise. Those who survive, the lucky, or perhaps the unlucky few, instinctively dig deeper. They burrow into the earth like moles, seeking refuge from the unrelenting storm. The shallow trenches become their only sanctuary, a damp, claustrophobic womb against the violence above. They hide. They wait, their bodies aching with exhaustion, their minds dulled by the constant hum of fear, all while knowing, with a deep, weary resignation, that another futile charge, another senseless advance, another order to walk into the open is always just around the corner. It is in this grim, seemingly unbreakable stalemate. This endless cycle of death and desperate survival. That something new began to stir. A quiet revolution, born of necessity and the stark reality of the trenches. It is here, in the depths of this despair, that a new kind of soldier began to emerge from the mud and the terror. Not a typical conscript, pushed unwillingly into the grinder, but a man forged by brutal lessons of survival, trained not just to fight, but to kill quickly, and often to die young. This is the genesis of the stormtrooper, a phantom of the battlefield, a harbinger of a new, terrifying way of war. As you huddle in the damp, claustrophobic confines of your dugout, the constant, low thrum of distant artillery becomes a dull ache in your bones. The endless cycle of advances and retreats, the futility of frontal assaults, began to wear not only on the body, but on the very spirit of the army. The generals, bewildered by the deadlock, searched desperately for a way to break the suffocating grip of the trenches. And from this desperate search, a quiet evolution began to take shape, deep within the German lines. At first, it was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible. Small, clandestine groups, often under the shroud of a thick, rolling fog or the deepest cloak of night, would slip silently across the desolation of no man's land. These were not mass charges, but quiet, surgical raiding parties. They moved with an almost ethereal grace, ghosts in the mist, their objective simple: to gather intelligence, to snatch a prisoner, to sow a seed of terror before melting back into the darkness from which they came. You might have seen their shadows, fleeting and indistinct, or heard the faint, muffled thud of their return, knowing that something momentous, something dangerous, had just transpired. The success of these initial, audacious raids did not go unnoticed. A glimmer of hope, a fragile spark, ignited in the minds of the high command. What if this wasn't just about raiding? What if it could be scaled? What if these tactics, honed in the shadows, could become the blueprint for an entirely new form of attack? The idea began to take root, slowly at first, like a hardy plant pushing through cracked earth. The Germans, with their meticulous precision and methodical approach, began to push this concept further, evolving these scattered raiding parties into something far more organized, far more deadly. They began creating specialized units, which they called shock detachments. These weren't just men. They were carefully selected individuals, honed for a singular, brutal purpose: close quarters killing. You watch as the call went out, not for average conscripts, but for a very specific type of soldier. They sought men of exceptional physical strength, men whose eyes held a glint of aggression, a fierce determination that few others possessed. But above all, they sought those with an almost reckless willingness to face what others shied away from: a near certain, violent death. These were the men who looked into the abyss and met its gaze without flinching, or at least, without showing it. You observed them as they began to gather, a different breed from the weary, shell-shocked veterans of the line. Their training camp was no ordinary place. It was a meticulously crafted replica of the enemy's trenches, a stark, muddy mirror of the very hell they were being prepared to unleash upon. Here, the emphasis was on speed, on brutal efficiency, on the psychology of terror. Their equipment was lighter, stripped down to the essentials. Gone were the heavy, cumbersome rifles of traditional infantry. Instead, they carried a more intimate, more personal arsenal of destruction. You see them practice with the sleek, lethal Luger pistols, often equipped with shoulder stocks to improve accuracy, allowing for rapid, controlled bursts of fire. Grenades, in particular, became an extension of their hands, not just for throwing into the open, but for clearing enclosed spaces, for overwhelming an enemy caught unaware. You watch them sharpen the edges of their standard-issue entrenching shovels, turning a simple digging tool into a crude, yet terrifying, close combat cleaver, effective in the tight, claustrophobic confines of a trench. Knives, honed to a razor's edge, became their silent companions, tools for a swift, merciless end. Their training was relentless, a brutal ballet of violence and stealth. They rehearsed assaults over and over again, movements becoming fluid, instinctive, second nature. They practiced scaling barbed wire, breaching dugouts, navigating mazes of trenches with blinding speed. Each man knew his role, his position, his objective, not just intellectually, but deep in his muscle memory. You can almost feel the rhythmic beat of their rigorous drills, the constant repetition of movement, whispered commands, the controlled explosions of practice grenades. Their creed was whispered like a mantra, a chilling philosophy for a new kind of war speed, surprise, and ruthless violence. They were being trained to infiltrate, to bypass the enemy's strong points, to flow like water through the weakest parts of the line, rather than to march in rigid, predictable ranks. They were the antithesis of the mass charge, the embodiment of a new, surgical approach to breaking the iron grip of the trenches. You watch them, these emerging phantoms, knowing that something fundamental had shifted, that the very nature of conflict was about to be redefined by these men, forged in the very mud and despair they now sought to conquer. October 1915, in the rugged, forested Vosges Mountains. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, a foretaste of the harsh winter yet to come. Imagine you are there, a silent observer, as the first true test of this new breed of soldier unfolds. The atmosphere hangs heavy, not just with the mountain air, but with a palpable tension. The sun, a pale disk in the sky, began its slow descent, casting long, deepening shadows that stretched across the jagged peaks and dense tree lines. For days, a meticulous plan had been laid, every detail considered, every potential obstacle analyzed. Now, the moment was upon them. A small detachment, these newly forged shock troops, gathered in the pre-dawn gloom, their faces grim, painted with mud for camouflage, their movements economical and silent. You can feel the nervous energy, the deep, shuddering breaths, the almost imperceptible tremor in the hands gripping their specialized weapons. Suddenly, the silence was shattered, not by the prolonged, soul-crushing barrages you'd grown accustomed to, but by a focused, furious burst of artillery fire. It pounded the French positions, a precise, violent symphony of destruction. The ground trembled beneath your feet, the air vibrated with concussive force, and the roar was deafening, filling every space, shaking every bone. But then, as abruptly as it began, it lifted. The thunder faded, replaced by an eerie, profound silence that seemed to press in on all sides, a silence even more unsettling than the noise. It was the quiet before the storm. In that pregnant pause, before the dust had even settled, before the last echoes had died, you see them move, not in a unified charge, but in scattered, ghost-like groups, melting out of the shadows. They crawled through the freshly churned earth, navigating the maze of craters left by the artillery. Their movements were low, fast, almost serpentine, their bodies hugging the contours of the ravaged landscape. In their fists, you see the unmistakable shapes of primed grenades, their pins already loosened, ready for instant deployment. They burst into the enemy trenches with a suddenness that bordered on the supernatural. One moment, there was quiet. The next, a maelstrom of violence. The French defenders, still dazed and disoriented by the abrupt artillery, were caught utterly unprepared. Many were still scrambling from the relative safety of their dugouts, rubbing sleep from their eyes, their minds struggling to comprehend the sudden shift from bombardment to intimate, brutal combat. They were met not by a wave of humanity, but by swift, silent figures, appearing as if from the very earth itself. The stormtroopers did not waste time on strongpoints, those fortified bunkers designed to withstand conventional assaults. Instead, with a tactical cunning born of their intensive training, they bypassed them entirely. Their goal was not to obliterate every pocket of resistance, but to create chaos, to sever the nerves of the enemy's command structure. The result was instantaneous and devastating panic, like a contagious disease, spread rapidly behind the French lines. You witnessed the unraveling, not by the sheer weight of numbers, not by a protracted struggle of attrition, but by the sheer terror and shock of the unexpected. The French lines, once seemingly impregnable, began to collapse, not under direct pressure, but from within, frayed by a confusion that fed on itself. It was a psychological victory as much as a physical one. For the very first time, the commanders, those distant figures poring over maps, began to grasp a profound truth, the seemingly unbreakable deadlock of the trenches, the endless, grinding stalemate, could, in fact, be broken. A new path forward, a terrifyingly effective one, had been revealed in the quiet, brutal efficiency of these new soldiers. A sliver of hope, albeit a dark one, had pierced the gloom of the Western Front. Imagine the sheer practicality, the chilling efficiency of the tools carried by these new stormtroopers. Their gear was not designed for comfort, or even for long-term survival in the traditional sense. Every item, every ounce, was selected and honed for a singular purpose: to inflict maximum damage, with maximum speed, in the brutal, claustrophobic confines of a trench. You can picture their packs, often lighter than those of regular infantry, yet packed with a more concentrated lethality. Foremost among their instruments of destruction were the sacks of stick grenades. These were not the defensive, fragmentation grenades meant to be thrown and then take cover. No, these were specifically chosen for their concussive force, their ability to clear a trench bay or a dugout with devastating efficiency. You can imagine them practicing the smooth, wooden handle of the grenade fitting snugly into their palm. The cap removed, the fuse pulled with a flick of the wrist, and then the swift, arcing throw. The small, localized explosion, followed by a cloud of smoke and debris, was perfect for flushing out defenders or eliminating resistance in confined spaces. Imagine the fear of waking to the thud of one of these landing among you. The frantic scramble, knowing escape is impossible. Then there were their firearms. The iconic Luger pistol, sleek and precise, was often equipped with a shoulder stock. This modification transformed a sidearm into a compact carbine, granting the stormtrooper rapid, accurate firepower in situations where a full-sized rifle would be cumbersome. You can almost feel the smooth metal in your hand, the weight of a fully loaded .32. drum magazine extending the pistol's lethality. This meant sustained fire in close quarters, a terrifying advantage in the intimate, chaotic melee of a trench raid. As the war progressed, the tools evolved, adapting to the ever-present demand for speed and shock. By 1918, a truly revolutionary weapon began to appear in the hands of these elite soldiers, the MP-18 submachine gun. Picture it now, a compact, sleek, barrel-shrouded weapon, firing pistol cartridges at an astonishing rate. In the tight, winding corridors of a trench, or bursting into a dugout, this weapon was nothing short of devastating. You can hear the staccato bark of its fire, a sound that struck fear into the hearts of any who faced it. Its ability to spray a rapid volley of rounds in close quarters made it the ultimate tool for trench clearing, a true harbinger of modern infantry combat. But not every encounter was decided by gunpowder. The stormtroopers were also masters of the blade, of the brutal, personal art of hand-to-hand combat. Their knives were not ceremonial. They were practical, razor-sharp instruments, designed for silent, swift kills. Bayonets, often shortened and honed to a wicked point, became extensions of their will. And then, there was the humble, entrenching spade, a common tool. Yet in their hands, it was transformed into a deadly weapon. Sharpened to an edge, it became a cleaver, capable of delivering crushing blows or severing limbs with terrifying efficiency. Hand-to-hand slaughter was not just a possibility. It was a guaranteed, integral part of their grim operations. Occasionally, you might even see the more terrifying, more archaic tools of destruction make an appearance: light flamethrowers. These were not the massive, cumbersome versions used for entrenched positions. No, these were smaller, more portable units, capable of unleashing a jet of liquid fire into dugouts, turning them into instant, horrific tombs. The sight of that searing flame, the smell of burning fuel and flesh, would linger in the mind long after the attack had passed, a testament to the sheer brutality these men were willing to employ. Everything they carried, every single item, was chosen for its contribution to speed, to shock, and to the brutal efficiency of killing in close quarters. Their gear was not designed to keep them alive in the traditional sense, to protect them from the relentless artillery or the sniper's bullet. Instead, it was meticulously selected and adapted to make them lethal, to maximize their impact, for as long as they could possibly last in the unforgiving crucible of the front lines. They were weapons themselves, outfitted with the best tools available for their grim, specialized purpose. The deepest, most profound terror often arrives not with a thunderous roar, but with a creeping silence. This truth was learned intimately as days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Most stormtrooper raids, the truly harrowing ones, began under the inky blackness of a moonless sky, or in the deceptive, shrouding embrace of a thick, rolling fog. It was in these hours, when the world seemed to hold its breath, that these silent hunters came alive. Imagine the absolute stillness. Imagine being there, part of a small, camouflaged squad. Your face smeared with mud and soot, blending seamlessly with the shadows. The air is cold, damp against your skin, and the only sound is the frantic beating of your own heart, a drum against your ribs. Your breath comes in shallow, controlled gasps, each exhalation a cloud in the frigid air. Ahead of you, the barbed wire, tangled labyrinth of death, stretches out into the gloom. With specialized cutters, men began to work, painstakingly, methodically, severing strands of steel, creating narrow, almost invisible pathways. Every snip was a gamble, every movement a risk. You'd pray, with a fervent intensity that bordered on desperation, not to stumble, not to make a sound, not to catch a piece of uniform on a loose barb. A wrong step, the snap of a twig, an involuntary sneeze, even the faintest whisper that carried too far. And the consequences were immediate, catastrophic. Flares would instantly arch into the sky, exploding with a blinding brilliance that turned night into day, illuminating every hidden detail. Then, the inevitable, the sickening whistle of incoming artillery. Followed by earth-shattering explosions, entire squads would vanish in a heartbeat, dying nameless, their existence erased from the face of the earth. But when successful, when the wire was breached and the path clear, the silence continued, unbroken. They moved forward, silent predators, towards the enemy's sentry posts. These lonely outposts, manned by tired, watchful eyes, were the first line of defense. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly silent. A sudden lunge, a muffled struggle, a cold, sharp blade across a throat. No screams, no warnings, just a quiet, efficient end. The body slumping into the mud, another anonymous casualty claimed by the darkness. Then, the true terror was unleashed. From the shadows, without a spoken command, grenades began to rain into the enemy's dugouts. The explosions were muffled, but concussive, ripping through the earth and timber, tearing through the flimsy protection. Men, jolted from a fitful sleep, awoke not to a distant alarm, but to the blinding flash of fire, the deafening roar, and the cold, unyielding steel of a bayonet or a spade in their beds. The transition from sleep to brutal, intimate combat was instantaneous and horrifying. Chaos spread through the enemy lines with a speed faster than any bullet. No one knew how many attackers there were. The darkness became their ally, distorting perceptions, multiplying shadows, transforming a small detachment into an unseen legion. The whispers of panic grew into shouts, then into desperate cries. The fear was palpable, infectious, spreading through the defenders like a wildfire. Survivors, shaken to their core, would later swear, with wide, terrified eyes, that these stormtroopers seemed to appear not from across the battlefield, but from the very ground itself. Phantoms conjured by the terror of the night. The darkness was not just an absence of light. It was an active participant, magnifying the horror, making every shadow a potential enemy, every quiet sound a harbinger of doom. The very name Verdun, even today, echoes with a profound and chilling resonance. It was February 1917 when the bitter cold of winter still clung to the shattered landscape, that the longest, most brutal battle of the entire war began. This was not merely a battle. It was a meat grinder, a relentless, attritional struggle that would chew through hundreds of thousands of lives. And it was here, in this crucible of unprecedented violence, that the stormtroopers received their true baptism of fire, a proving ground that would cement their fearsome reputation. The initial, earth-shattering roar, the opening salvo of a bombardment unlike any seen before. Shells rained down incessantly, turning the once forested hills into a churned, desolate moonscape. Through this apocalyptic landscape, under a sky perpetually choked with smoke and the acrid smell of high explosives. The stormtroopers led the first waves. They moved with an almost unnatural calm, weaving through the falling debris, advancing even as shells still exploded around them. A ghostly procession against the backdrop of absolute destruction. Their meticulously rehearsed tactics were put into devastating practice. They did not pause to assault every strong point, every fortified bunker bristling with machine guns. Instead, they flowed like a dark river, bypassing the most heavily defended positions, seeking out the weak spots, the overlooked gaps in the French lines. Their objective was not to engage in head-on clashes, but to infiltrate, to penetrate deep behind the enemy's front. Confusion, their most potent weapon after surprise, began to spread rapidly through the French command structure, a silent, corrosive force. The enemy was left scrambling, unable to discern the true intent or scale of the attack. Then came the almost mythical account, a feat of audacious bravery and cunning that would forever be etched into the annals of this brutal conflict. Just 98 men, a mere handful in the vast-churning maw of Verdun, managed to creep through the shattered landscape, unnoticed, into the very heart of Verdun's defenses, Fort Douaumont. This wasn't just any fort. It was a colossal, seemingly impregnable bastion of concrete and steel. A symbol of French resilience, a fortress thought to be unassailable. Imagine their silent journey, their whispered communications, the immense pressure of their mission. Through an open gun turret, a single, overlooked vulnerability, they slipped inside. The garrison, caught in a state of shock and disbelief, their minds still reeling from the relentless bombardment, was overwhelmed. They had expected an assault from without, a frontal charge against their formidable walls. Instead, the enemy was suddenly within, materializing from the shadows of their own fortress. Without firing a single shot, this colossal symbol of French strength, this cornerstone of Verdun's defenses, fell. It was gone overnight, a victory of stealth and audacity over brute force. From that moment forward, a new kind of fear began to grip every Allied soldier stationed along the Western Front. It was not just the fear of artillery or machine guns, but a more primal, more insidious dread, the fear of the shadows that might come in the night. The stormtrooper, once an experimental concept, had become a terrifying reality, a phantom that could appear anywhere, at any time, a silent harbinger of chaos and destruction. Verdun, in its terrible grandeur, had not only proven the stormtroopers' effectiveness, but had also etched their legend into the very soul of the war. October 1917 and the Italian front, often overshadowed by the relentless grind of the Western Front, was about to become the stage for a demonstration of stormtrooper tactics on an unprecedented scale. Imagine the cold, crisp air of the Julian Alps, a stark contrast to the mud and flatlands of France. Imagine being there, witnessing the unfolding of what would become a name synonymous with total disaster, Caporetto. The morning began not with the usual artillery barrage, but with something far more insidious. Gas shells, their contents invisible yet deadly, were launched, enveloping the Italian positions in a suffocating, poisonous cloud. This was followed by thick, obscuring smoke, a deliberate act to blind the defenders, to disorient them, to strip away their ability to see what was coming. Panic, a cold, creeping dread, began to set in long before the actual assault even began. The air itself felt heavy with foreboding. Then, the storm truly arrived, like a torrent unleashed. The infiltrators, these highly trained stormtroopers, began to pour through the weakest points of the Italian line. They did not attack the fortified strongholds directly. No. Their training dictated a different approach. They slipped through the gaps, flowed around the entrenched positions, bypassing the most formidable defenses. The objective was to penetrate deep, to unravel the enemy from within, rather than to engage in costly frontal assaults. Entire Italian divisions began to crumble, not under sustained, heavy fire, but from the sheer shock, the overwhelming confusion, and the terror of an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere, attacking from unexpected directions. Thousands of soldiers, disoriented and demoralized, surrendered without firing a single shot, their will to fight dissolving in the face of this new, terrifying form of warfare. The lines, once seemingly solid, then collapsed like a house of cards. Within hours, the entire front line disintegrated. The astonishing speed of their advance, 15 miles, gained in a single, devastating day. A feat almost unimaginable in the static, bogged-down warfare of the First World War. The statistics that follow are staggering, almost unbelievable in their grim severity. Over 265,000 Italian soldiers were captured. Their war abruptly and ignominiously ended. 10,000 were killed, their lives extinguished in the chaotic retreat. And another 30,000 were wounded, their bodies broken by the relentless onslaught. The word Caporetto quickly echoed across Europe, becoming synonymous with total disaster, a stark and brutal lesson in the power of infiltration and psychological warfare. It stands as a chilling testament to the effectiveness of the stormtrooper doctrine, a terrifying blueprint for breaking even the most entrenched of positions. The quiet efficiency, the ruthless speed, the overwhelming shock, these were the hallmarks of a new kind of war. And the Italians had borne the full, devastating brunt of its unleashed fury. The world watched, stunned, as the stormtroopers carved a path of destruction, reshaping the understanding of modern combat. March 1918. The world held its breath. Germany, battered and exhausted after 4 long years of war, knew this was its last, desperate gamble. The war on the Western Front had reached a critical juncture. American forces were beginning to arrive, fresh and determined, promising to tilt the balance irrevocably against Germany. The Kaiser's high command decided to throw everything they had left, every remaining ounce of strength, into one massive, final push. Operation Michael, the Spring Offensive. Imagine being there, in the bitter cold of the pre-dawn hours, the air thick with anticipation and the raw scent of gunpowder. The sheer scale of the preparation was staggering. Over 500 artillery guns, lined up wheel to wheel, stretched for miles along the front. Then, with a roar that transcends all comprehension, they unleashed their fury. 3.5 million shells screamed through the dark sky in just 5 agonizing hours. A bombardment so intense it tore the very fabric of the earth. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and fury. As the artillery shifted, creating a creeping barrage that slowly advanced, a dense, choking fog of gas and smoke shrouded the entire front. Visibility dropped to mere feet, creating a surreal, nightmarish landscape. It was into this swirling, toxic mist that the stormtroopers, the spearhead of this colossal offensive, advanced. You can almost feel their disciplined, relentless forward momentum, slipping past stunned British sentries still reeling from the unimaginable bombardment, disoriented by the gas and smoke, their senses overwhelmed. The scene unfolded with a chilling efficiency. Trenches that had held firm for years, becoming symbols of an unbreakable deadlock, began to collapse. Outposts, once impregnable, simply vanished, swallowed by the relentless advance. Thousands of British soldiers, isolated, confused, and utterly demoralized, surrendered, their resistance broken by the sheer speed and unexpected nature of the attack. They were not fighting a conventional army. They were fighting phantoms emerging from the fog. In one single, astonishing day, the British line broke deeper than at any point in the entire war. The ground that had been fought over, inch by agonizing inch, for years, was now conceded in miles. For the first time, the seemingly unbreakable trench deadlock was shattered. Truly and decisively, the enemy was pushed back, not just yards, but an astonishing 40 miles in a matter of days. A dizzying advance compared to the static warfare that had defined the conflict. The initial exhilaration, the taste of victory, was intoxicating. It felt as though the war, at long last, might be won. But beneath this initial success, a grim reality began to manifest. The cost of this colossal gamble was catastrophic, far exceeding what even the desperate German High Command had anticipated. The shock troops, these elite stormtroopers who had spearheaded the advance, bled out at an unsustainable rate. They were at the very tip of the spear, always in the thickest fighting, always taking the heaviest casualties. They were lost faster than they could possibly be replaced. Their irreplaceable skills and fierce spirit extinguished in the fires of their own success. The victory, though initially spectacular, carried within it the seeds of ultimate defeat. The very nature of being a stormtrooper meant a life lived on the razor's edge, a constant dance with death. One comes to understand that their incredible successes carried within them the devastating seeds of their own destruction. They were, by design, always at the tip of the spear, the first to breach enemy lines, the first to face the most ferocious resistance, inevitably, the first to die. Their triumphs were bought with an unsustainable currency, their own lives. Imagine the relentless pace of their advance during Operation Michael. They moved with a speed and ferocity that shocked the Allies. But this very speed proved to be a cruel mistress. They pushed too far, too fast, outrunning their own supply lines. You can almost feel the gnawing emptiness in their stomachs, the thirst that parched their throats, the exhaustion that seeped into every bone. Without consistent food, water, and ammunition, even the most elite soldiers began to falter. They became isolated pockets of desperate men, surrounded by the enemy, cut off from the vital arteries of support. Entire battalions, meticulously trained and hardened by combat, were simply erased from the rosters in a matter of weeks, sometimes even days. The losses were staggering, irreparable. There were simply no replacements of equal skill. No other soldiers who could step into the void left by these specialized warriors. Their training was too unique, their experience too specific, to be replicated quickly or easily. Each fallen stormtrooper represented not just a loss of a man, but the loss of a rare and vital asset, a highly specialized tool for a particular job. Operation Michael, despite its initial, breathtaking gains, vividly illustrated this tragic paradox. The German casualties mounted with horrifying speed, totaling over 240,000 men. And within that terrible number, the stormtroopers, by the very nature of their role, bore the absolute worst of it. They were ground down, shattered, and ultimately consumed by the very offensive they had made possible. Their numbers dwindled, their effectiveness waned, and the sharp, terrifying edge they had brought to the battlefield became dull, blunted by attrition. As their strength bled out, as the irreplaceable skills of these elite soldiers diminished, the grand offensive, once so full of promise, began to collapse. The momentum stalled, then reversed. The exhausted, depleted German army could not sustain the advance. Retreat became the only option. By the summer of 1918, the tide had irrevocably turned. The Allies, bolstered by the arrival of fresh, eager American reinforcements, began their own relentless counterattacks. The men who had once terrified Europe, who had shattered the deadlock of the trenches, now found themselves on the defensive, outmanned, outgunned, and utterly spent. Their unique ability to break the lines was gone, replaced by a profound weariness, a spirit stretched beyond recovery. They simply vanished into the brutal statistics of war. Their units dissolved, their impact diminished, their purpose tragically fulfilled and tragically lost. The very success they achieved had ultimately condemned them to annihilation. By November 1918, the long, brutal nightmare of the war was finally drawing to a close. The great conflict, which had reshaped nations and shattered generations, was lost for Germany. As the armistice took hold, the stormtroopers, as a distinct fighting force, were quietly dissolved, fading into the collective memory of a war-weary world. Imagine the long, silent journey home for those few who survived. They were no longer the feared phantoms of the battlefield, but men scarred, not just physically, but deeply within their souls, by the unspeakable things they had done, and the unspeakable things they had witnessed in the darkness of the trenches. Many struggled to reintegrate into a peacetime society, forever changed by the unique crucible of their service. Yet, despite their disappearance as a named unit, their profound impact on the art of warfare was indelible. Their innovative tactics, born of desperation and genius, lived on, echoing through the decades that followed. The principles they pioneered, infiltration rather than mass assault, the deployment of small, highly mobile squads, the emphasis on autonomous action, and the shock value of sudden, overwhelming violence, fundamentally reshaped military thought. From the elite commando units of World War II to the modern-day special forces groups like the British SAS and the American Navy SEALs, the ghost of the stormtrooper still subtly shapes modern warfare. You can trace their influence in the way these units operate highly specialized training. Lighter and more focused armaments, rapid strikes, bypassing enemy strong points, and the deep psychological impact they aim to achieve. They proved, beyond any doubt, that the rigid, seemingly unbreakable deadlock of trench warfare could be shattered, that new methods could overcome old stalemates. But this profound military innovation came at a terrible, incalculable cost. The stormtroopers, in their relentless pursuit of breaking the deadlock, effectively annihilated themselves. The statistics speak a grim truth. An estimated 90% of them never returned home. They were the ultimate victims of their own success, consumed by the very fire they had unleashed. Their daring, their efficiency, their sheer audacity propelled them into the history books, but also into the grave. And so, as the quiet of the night deepens, the figure of the stormtrooper remains not just a soldier, but a powerful, complex symbol, a symbol of chilling terror in the hearts of their enemies, a symbol of military innovation that forever altered the course of warfare. and perhaps, most profoundly, a symbol of the profound, tragic futility of war itself. Their story serves as a somber reminder that even the most brilliant tactical advancements often come with an unbearable human price. A price paid in blood and lost souls, echoing through the silent halls of history. Their legacy, a chilling blend of fear and ingenuity, continues to whisper through the ages, a testament to humanity's capacity for both destruction and adaptation.